The negotiations in Geneva between the Ukrainian and Russian delegations have completely reached a deadlock. They ended much earlier than the scheduled time. This is the assessment given by the American delegation, and it's all because of Russia's attempts to stall for time. Kremlin representative Vladimir Medinsky effectively disrupted the negotiations by issuing a new ultimatum to Ukraine. The Russian delegation itself noted that no significant progress was made in the negotiations. And it has now become known that, as part of the negotiations, Russia is also demanding a written guarantee that NATO will not expand eastward. And here, President Zelensky admitted that in private conversations, Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner are actually convincing the Ukrainian delegation that Russia really wants to end the war. And so, both representatives of Donald Trump urged Zelensky to impose this vision on the Ukrainian people. At the same time, sources indicate that the main reason for the failure of the negotiations is not that Ukraine refuses to give up territories to Russia, but that the United States refused to provide security guarantees. And to this day, they still haven't been able to clearly articulate what exactly that free economic zone in Donbass, which they are so actively proposing, should look like. But Trump, on the other hand, is actively urging Ukraine to make concessions. In this episode, the latest insider information about the real failure of the negotiations in Geneva. My name is Alexei Peichi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start this episode, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and leave any comment you want. If you consider our work important and necessary, you can support this YouTube channel financially with your donation or a paid subscription using the links and details in the description of this video. I will be grateful for any support you provide. So, the negotiations in Geneva between Ukraine, Russia, and the United States have failed, and the Russian-Ukrainian negotiation process is once again at a dead end. And, the external outline of events over the past month largely repeated the plot twists that are already familiar from last year. First, the Kremlin rejected a peace plan that satisfied Kiev. Then, Stephen Witkoff's visit to Moscow. And the coercion of Ukraine into direct negotiations, which yield absolutely no results. And just recently, the publication Axios directly stated that during another round of negotiations between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States, which took place in Geneva, the political group reached a deadlock, while the military group continued to make progress. According to them, this is due to the position outlined by the head of the Russian negotiating team, Vladimir Medinsky. Representatives of Russia complained about the recent public statement made by the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. They just behave like children, they come to negotiations, and then the Americans sit there and say, "Can you imagine Zelensky offended our plush dictator again?" In their opinion, Zelensky is not conducting serious negotiations, but rather trying to boost his popularity within the country ahead of possible elections. Which, of course, is complete nonsense, because it has nothing to do with the actual issues. And after that, the Russians themselves, led by Medinsky, stated that the new meeting between Russia and Ukraine in Geneva did not bring any significant progress. The second round of negotiations on Wednesday turned out to be 3 times shorter than the previous one. 2 hours instead of 6. And at the end, the head of the Russian delegation, Medinsky, said that the dialogue was tough. And it's telling that at the briefing for Russian propagandists, Zelensky simply ignored all the questions. That is, even for his own seemingly Kremlin henchmen, he still just rattled off a couple of words, said the negotiations were difficult, and left. On the other hand, Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the meeting discussed issues concerning eastern Ukraine and infrastructure facilities. Well, hinting at the fate of Donbass and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Zelensky stated, and I quote, "The positions of the parties remain different. There is no significant progress yet. But at the same time, according to the Ukrainian president, the military part of the negotiations was constructive." Quote, "The parties generally understand how monitoring of the ceasefire and the war could be organized, provided there is political will. The monitoring will definitely involve the United States, which is a positive signal. But I should note right away that earlier, many media outlets began reporting that Zelensky had allegedly instructed his team to organize his negotiations with Putin in Geneva. That's a lie. And Zelensky asked his negotiators in Geneva to raise the issue of a meeting with Putin because they believe that the best way to achieve a breakthrough on the territories is a face-to-face meeting with Putin, that's all. And also, don't forget that the bald little weirdo will still be afraid to fly anywhere, especially far from Moscow. At the same time, it became known that during negotiations to end the war in Ukraine, Russia intends to seek from NATO a written commitment not to expand eastward. And now this is a new reason for Putin to drag out the negotiations. Russian negotiators insist on canceling the decision of the 2008 Bucharest summit, where NATO countries agreed that Ukraine and Georgia should become members of the alliance in the future. And let me remind you here, Putin has repeatedly said that Western countries betrayed and deceived Russia, this is a quote, by promising not to expand NATO to the east. When and who made this promise, Putin, of course, cannot say. They claim that supposedly someone promised them something verbally, but there are no documents. Well, and Putin says we were deceived again. Now the Kremlin has remembered this and is using it in negotiations. And here I want to remind you that the format of negotiations in Abu Dhabi was actually productive. Now those negotiations will seem really productive and constructive to us. The Russian delegation was headed by a high-ranking military official, and the discussions were about mechanisms for a ceasefire and monitoring its implementation. In diplomatic practice, such negotiations are called technical or preliminary. During them, the technical details of an agreement are worked out, even though there is not yet a political decision on it. They can be very useful, but without a political decision, they mean little. That is, you can agree, for example, that there will be a ceasefire tomorrow, but how will it work technically? But if there is no political decision, it means nothing. At the same time, the optimistic expectations associated with this technical track of the negotiation process have shifted the public's focus away from the deadlock observed in the political track. And it is precisely the political track that is led by Medinsky from the Russian side who is driving the negotiations into a dead end. Let me explain here. Some in Washington believe that the main problem with the political track is Ukraine's unwillingness to agree to hand over the Donbas territories to the Russians. But in reality, the main reason is the Trump administration's unwillingness to clearly and properly formulate the level of security guarantees that Ukraine will receive in return. Kyiv wants to receive clear guarantees on this issue before the question of the territories is put to a nationwide referendum. But Trump does not want to give these guarantees, despite rumors that an agreement on them has long been ready. At the same time, there is also a third track, which is the commercial economic or trade economic track of the negotiations. And here I will say that the expectations of the American negotiators regarding the benefits of signing a large-scale economic plan with Russia are the hidden reason for the pressure they are exerting, forcing Kyiv to make territorial concessions. Also, a separate episode on this topic will be on the YouTube channel today. And regarding this, Volodymyr Zelensky gave a number of comments. For example, Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner told Zelensky that Russia really wants to end the war and that he should coordinate with his team on this basis. In response, Zelensky advised Witkoff and Kushner not to try to force him to sell a vision of peace that the Ukrainian people would see as a failed story. Zelensky said that it is unfair that Trump continues to publicly call on Ukraine and not Russia to make concessions for the sake of peace. And in the past few days, Trump has already stated twice that it is Zelensky who should make concessions. But the most striking thing is Zelensky's statement that Washington still hasn't decided on its position regarding which country will have sovereignty over the free economic zone if it is demilitarized. But Trump is actively promoting this idea. Zelensky also stated that he is ready to discuss the withdrawal of troops from Donbas, but only if Moscow pulls back its troops by an equivalent distance. And regarding the negotiations, Zelensky fears that the change of the head of the negotiating team in Russia is connected to the fact that they are simply trying to stall the meeting. They just greeted each other and left. Or are they trying to buy more time for the Russians on the battlefield? And I'll finish with a quote from Zelensky. Medinsky often indulges in philosophizing about historical roots. We don't have time for all this crap. We need to make decisions and stop the war. At the end of this episode, I want to make a recommendation for the male audience of my channel. Many have already relaxed after February 14th, but March 8th is still ahead, so get ready. Often, we men approach surprising or giving a gift to a woman as if it's solving a political or business goal. We fill our heads with goals, budget, logistics, KPIs, and so on and so on. So we expect some wild excitement from the woman, but when she just says a simple thank you, we start to get nervous thinking, but I tried so hard, where's the excitement? And so I watched a video by a psychologist where she explains exactly why our efforts only make things worse, and she explains how to make things better. So, if you don't want to waste another March 8th working hard with no results, be sure to check out this analysis. As someone who cares about making sure my efforts always get a real response, not just a polite nod, it was super helpful for me to watch this analysis. As usual, I'm leaving the link to the video in the description and in the pinned comment. I recommend you go and watch it, just 10 minutes of your time, and as they say, the day is saved. By the way, the female audience will also find it interesting to watch. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, and subscribe to my Telegram channel Peachy News. The link is in the description. Give a like and hit the bell if you want to support the work of this channel. All the links are also in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.